that then.
Thank you. And I think in the relatively short time that this committee has been operating, we have, of course, had lots of advice and training from the Centre for Public Scrutiny and others. And I think, you know, the committee members as a whole, I think, have been listening and taking that advice. Adam.
Just going back to Richard's point of, you know, the oversight and the scrutiny of the process from a district and borough point of view, you know, as a scrutiny chairman at DDC, I've looked at aspects of the transformation moving towards unitary on several occasions within my committee there, and it's something that we're going to be looking at more regularly moving forward. Maybe there's a case for inviting the chairman of ONS or Scrutiny and Improvement from each constituent council to a joint meeting and establishing, you know, a coherent work programme moving forward.
I think that's probably a really good idea. I'm just thinking of my own council, Kettering Borough, who haven't as yet discussed any of this, I don't believe, at their scrutiny, but perhaps that could be the impetus to get them to do so. Wendy.
I agree with Victoria that any information that's available we should have on site on a regular basis. Going back to what Richard said regarding dual hatters, obviously we are a county council committee, but dual hatters won't necessarily know what's going on. East Northampton no longer has a scrutiny committee, they have a transformation committee. Dual hatters aren't allowed to sit on that, although it doesn't stop us from going along and listening. But the work is being done before that. A lot of that work is being done prior to that. So a lot of councillors, dual hatters or not, aren't aware of what's going on until after the event. So I think, you know, by the time that comes to us, it's probably a bit late.
I absolutely agree, and I'm from the north of the county, and the joint committee hasn't even met yet. So up until now, all the discussions have been in almost a secret group between the leaders and chief execs, and it is sometimes hard to know exactly what's going on. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. And I note your comment on that we've not even had a meeting yet, but I can actually say that the NCC councillors have pushed for that, and that will be happening very soon. I was told this morning it's been arranged. Don't hold your breath. Going forward with this, Chair, is that we had two very good people sitting in front of us answering questions and giving us the information that we were requiring. The only concerns I have is that we now know that Councillor Golby is going to be taking the lead on the ICT, but we still were a little bit unsure who's portfolio holder or who's going to take charge of the transformation area. From all I can work out, it was a lead officer, but we don't know what cabinet member is actually going to take the role and lead in that. So I'd like that question, or James is maybe just having an answer there already. James?
There was a cabinet post for transformation, wasn't there? But that's now gone, hasn't it? Yeah.
So my understanding of what was said was that Councillor Golby has a portfolio that includes IT and transformation. So from the NCC perspective, he would be the political lead for those two areas. Of course, reference was also made to projects within the overall transformation programme having SROs, senior responsible officers, to lead those. But from NCC's perspective, the political lead will be the leader of the council.
Thank you for that clarification. On that vein of thought then, Chair, may we be prudent to request that the appropriate time slot is made for the representation, or the representative, i.e. the leader, Councillor Golby, actually has the spot put in his diary to attend the committee when asked to, without having to sort of like cut short and disappear. I know it's not his fault. I know that he had another meeting booked, but I think moving forward it is important that we have not only the officers, the lead officers sitting there to answer questions, is that we also have the lead portfolio holder in the same place for the duration of the meeting. It's only a suggestion at this time, Chair.
I think I would agree with you of the importance of this committee. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do recognise it is difficult sometimes with senior officers and indeed politicians. But yeah, wherever possible, this committee should take precedence. I've got a couple of speakers. I'm guessing on that issue, so sorry, Jill, I'll come back to you. Victoria, then Cecile.
Cecile was before.
Oh, was she? Sorry.
Yes. Because our committee meet on the Wednesday, that is the day that all the leaders and the CEO always meet. So Wednesday for our committee, if we want to have Matt Goby might be a bit more difficult. So if we move the date or put it in the afternoon, we have more chance. But Wednesday is a day that is a busy day for Matt.
Okay, didn't realise that. We've tried afternoon meetings. They tend to overrun, which is why we came to the morning, but possibly we could...
With all due respect, Chair, I understand that it's what they're saying, but it's a damn lot easier for them to move their meeting than it is to move this one, and this one is far more important, in my own opinion.
So that could be one of our recommendations to the leader, if the committee were so inclined. James.
Just a thought, Chair, through you. Of course, when the committee initially met on an afternoon, it was at the start of its life. It doesn't have the experience it has now, which may hopefully mean that the extra concentration and focus would now produce an afternoon meeting that could end in good time rather than running on longer.
Interesting point. Victoria.
It would also explain Teresa's absence as well. And I tend to agree with Richard here. I think it is really important if the Centre of Public Scrutiny actually advises that the Chief Executive should be present at a lot of scrutiny meetings, but she goes to that meeting as well. I don't think it should be moved completely to the afternoon. I think just a delaying of this meeting by an hour or so would allow them to come along at the beginning of the meeting and then go to their other one. As one recommendation. The other one is, again, thinking of what Richard was saying, and I can see what he's saying here, is that we're all working in, we've got the leaders and executives meeting, but we're all working in silos, but we're actually scrutinising the same thing. And I suppose the question there is there scope for a scrutiny committee that overarchingly looks at the unitary, that involves everybody that's involved in the unitary?
Working group.
Or a working group, or not, I'm looking at James, I'd like to make more work for you. But, I think we are moving towards that. I can see where you're going, is that we sort of do this, we deliver this, but the districts and boroughs haven't really got a clue what we're doing, what we're scrutinising, and they do now need to start being involved, because, we're 80% of the service delivery, and I really want the districts and boroughs to understand what that service delivery is and how hard it is and how impactful it is, children's and adult social care. So the more that they can be involved in that at this stage is going to help us going forward.
I think if we're thinking of setting up a new group, a working group, that may be a discussion to have at the joint committees, I guess. I've got a couple of...
So can I just come in on that point?
Yep, fine.
Sorry, committee.
Apologies to Jill and Malcolm, who are waiting.
But I think that is a joint committee issue, and I promise you, those of us that are on the joint committee, we will raise that very point to say we've had this discussion at the NCC scrutiny. We feel that we're just going to be scrutinising part of the cake. It needs. Now, they did talk about the shadow authority having a scrutiny, but now they're talking about the shadow authority not existing and the joint committees continuing. So maybe we need a task and finish, not but a scrutiny group that so we will take that and I'll report that back to this committee.
I think, we're a little bit behind.
Okay. I've got James wants to come in, and then I still have Jill and I still have Malcolm.
It sounds as if an emerging conclusion from the discussion may be around the area of the importance of there being appropriate scrutiny of the development of local government reform, and that given the nature of the topic, that should be done jointly. And that could potentially be a conclusion that this committee relays to the appropriate body within the governance structure relating to local government reform. I'm I'm not sufficiently cited on the detail of the arrangements to advise you definitively at this point as to what that body should be, but it could be identified, and the Scrutiny Committee's conclusions could be relayed to it.
I'd suggest that we put forward exactly that to the two joint committees, see how they respond. If they don't respond, if they don't agree to that kind of working group or whatever, we can then go back to us inviting them to our meetings or some other form of moving forward. James.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, this morning, the NCC Overview and Scrutiny Committee has looked at the implications for, or one aspect of the implications for NCC of delivering local government reform. We've heard from Councillor Brown that your equivalents at Daventry District Council have done the same. There is scope to do that. I think where there starts to become more of an issue is if you've got one of the existing authorities, Overview and Scrutiny Committees, seeking to scrutinise something that concerns more than one local authority. There is potentially, arguably, scope to do that. Where you have a practical problem is if you've got multiple scrutiny committees essentially doing the same thing on multiple occasions. That's where you do start getting a particularly strong argument for doing one thing once jointly, which is what I think the committee is identifying.
I think so. I'd like at this stage, if I can, I spoke earlier about how we've had support from Centre for Public Scrutiny. I'd like to bring Ian in, if I may, who has had experience working with Dorset on their... Sorry, could you use the mic because we're being web...
Yeah, the two Dorsets, which in a similar way have split their districts, boroughs and county into two unitary authorities. And I've been working quite closely with Bournemouth Christchurch Poole Unitary. What they did is obviously the constituent authorities, county, districts, boroughs, would still need, as they did, to have their own scrutiny committees, to get their own councils, if you like, over the line, and to scrutinise, you know, the business as usual and strategic stuff for the council moving into local government reform. But to have what they had, and it's an option to have this joint or shadow, whichever model you move into, but a joint scrutiny committee, which was the committee, the only committee that looked at the LGR aspects of it. And our recommendation to that was that they look through a risk lens to look at all the areas that are potential issues, big problems such as, you know, the shadow budget, aggregation, disaggregation, stuff like that, sort of the big knotty stuff, and to focus on scrutinising that. So clearly the governance is a matter for you and for LGR to work out, but just for you know, information, that's the way it was done there, and it seemed to work quite well. To have that joint group of people representing each of the constituent authorities. And in a shadow capacity, because it needs to be a bit more formal, because in a shadow capacity, you know, things like working out what the get-go look of scrutiny would look like, you know, what the first scrutiny would look like. Why would that do that just as I sat down? I mean, forgive me. They would need to work out a kind of a simple rule book, if you like, the way that worked in terms of composition, in terms of decision making of, not decision making, but recommendations of scrutiny. So in a sense, there's a task just moving forward as to which is what you're starting to talk about now, how that gets broken down. And not forgetting that still you've got councils to run.
And I guess we're talking there of a more formal approach that will need to involve, obviously, all those councils, where we started really, didn't we, just talking about this one issue that we've been discussing, because the shadow scrutiny will have a lot more to discuss other than just the financing of local government reform. Sorry, I've got a few people still want to come in. Can I bring in...
Yeah, on this sort of topic to start with, I'll just remind everyone that we have got the local government reform working party as well, which I'm on, and I'm not sure who else is. We've only met once, and I don't know quite what the plan is ongoing and where that could fit in. But it's certainly something that could be taken on board, because presumably it's some sort of scrutiny committee. And how it would work with the scrutiny committee, I'm not quite sure, but that's something we need to take into account. The thing I was going to ask initially when I put my hand up was on a different topic. The briefing we had, I didn't get any concept that there was a 43 million ongoing, only that was the old figure. It was, it says, you know, the 4 million that's already been spent, the 80% of the business rates, which you knew was about perhaps 17 million, and a 6.5 for transformation. It was sort of in bits. If you add it up, it may well come to something like that, but I just got the impression it was a lot less, because at the end it just says we need to find 1 to 2, which doesn't sound quite so much. So I was just a bit disappointed that we suddenly find that it was 43, and obviously there's quite a discussions today, and we don't know all the figures, and we're going to get that at a later date, at June the 10th. But I just a bit disappointed that the report that we got didn't really bring it together as a whole. Just tried to sort of say, well, it's only another couple of million. It made it sound a lot less than the 43, although bearing in mind, obviously, that is between all the authorities.
Thank you. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but for me, one of the things that came out of this morning was possibly a greater confusion than I had before about all these various pots of money and things, and I'm looking forward to the breakdown that we've been promised prior to the June the 10th meeting, and I think I agree, was it Victoria who said that scrutiny should hopefully get sight of that before that briefing? I think that would be very useful. Okay, good point. That could be one of our recommendations then. Malcolm, you also have been waiting patiently.
I'm a very patient man, Mr. Chairman, but I thank you for your introduction. Thank you. I think we're going down the wrong road, in the sense that we're looking at meetings, but I take it very seriously what Wendy was saying, that councillors are totally in the dark of where we are now, which is totally wrong, and we need to change that. And the only way we can change that is by giving those people information. And the point is, we can sit round here all day discussing when we're going to, what meetings we're going to have, this, that and the other. But it's very simple, in my opinion. Like I asked Matt earlier on today, to do a programme of these meetings which we're going to have on 10th of June, are very important. With that information, and I keep using the word information, is that we need now to get that, go down the line, back to the districts, back to the parishes, for the feedback. Now, we're very lucky because we've got a meeting book on the 16th of June, so any kind of feedback after the 10th, either from members, the county councillors, or district members, or parish councils, can come back to that meeting through a channel which we're now opening up, I hope, you know what I mean? But it's all about what information. Now, I believe we all have a responsibility. The chief execs and the leaders of all the districts and boroughs have a responsibility of informing their members, and they can only do that with a piece of paper that's got all the information for them to tell their members, so they can introduce it differently. Because our cultures, wherever we come from, whether it's the south of the Northamptonshire or the north of Northamptonshire, we have different cultures within those areas. So things may well be explained differently by independent people, but the people, I believe, who can explain the situation is their local leader and chief exec to get this information over to the people and see what concerns they have, so that can be fed back some stage before the next meeting. So it's very important that we put forward to Matt that we have a programme of these meetings like the 10th of June in the programme for the forthcoming year, at least, so members will know what the situation is, because they do need to have the information. Without information, you're dead. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so suggestion for NCC to provide further briefings, planned briefings throughout the year. I mean, we still need, I think, to formalise some way of working with the districts and boroughs. We can't rely on informal ways of doing that. Wendy?
Can I just come back? I didn't actually say we were completely in the dark. We're not completely in the dark. We have had some information, but as Malcolm said, the people that are in the know are the leaders and the chief execs, and possibly the people on the joint committee.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think, in fairness, Malcolm was suggesting that if we get this information on paper in formal briefings, etc., that would benefit that arrangement. Adam?
No, he bumped me.
You speak so rarely. I wasn't aware you wanted to speak.
Well, he bumped me. I can't believe. Okay. With regard to anything we put forward as a committee, with regard to this sort of cross-cutting scrutiny that is required at the unitary or the proposed unitary level, it must go through either the steering groups, the joint chief exec and leaders, or where there are constitutionally joint committees, which are actually in the West only. Well, I don't think it's something that we can do alone. That if we need to do anything with regard to scrutinising local government reform and transformation, with regard to the monies being allocated, it's got to be, we've got to go to the current bodies. We haven't got to set anything up. We go to the current formed bodies, groups or constitutionally groups, to actually say, look, this needs to be addressed. What is your plan? The other issue is that it's a request for James and obviously the committee, how you feel. We seem to talk about local government reform in isolation to transformation. And although transformation is primarily an NCC thing, because of it has to be joined, they are totally interlinked. And so therefore, wherever we're talking about influencing local government reform, we must include and transformation. And then hopefully those committees at the high level will have overview of both, even though NCC may have the primary role of transformation. But so I'm just wondering in our narratives whether we think the two should be linked together whenever we're talking. Because what worries, we'll end up just scrutinising local government reform and the transitions happening over here, or transformation, and we're missing out on how the two link up.
I agree. The transformation, certainly the transformation that NCC are undertaking over the next year or two, is vital to how we move towards unitaries, partly from just a financial point of view, but also from future service delivery. And I tend to agree with you. I mean, this is why I suggested that actually one of the recommendations maybe from today should be that the two joint committees, and the North are just about to start work, are given the option to discuss what we've been talking about. If they meet the challenge, if they can, you know, between us all come up with something that will work, great. And if not, we'll just have to discuss it again, I think. And anybody else? But Adam, you're waiting to come in.
Thank you. Just developing Malcolm's suggestion that we have regular briefings followed by quarterly meetings or whatever. Why do we not just request that we have those written briefings, and then those written briefings go to full council for discussion? You know, we already have the forum for as many members as possible to to debate and have their input. I don't think additional meetings are necessary, especially when full council meetings are often fairly short on occasions.
I wonder if the idea of having briefings for members, and this is an idea from the leadership obviously, is about not having them in a public forum, because they may want to discuss ideas that aren't yet formulated properly, and we can sort of, I don't know, just a thought that might be resistance to that. Chris?
But at the same time,
expanding on Adam's idea, they could be held on the same day. So we could have the briefing at 10 o'clock till 11 and then start the council meeting later, you know, so that everybody's there.
I think the fundamental point is we're agreeing that we believe that all members should have briefings. How they choose to do that will be their leadership's decision, but we could put forward those proposals as perhaps ideas for them to consider. Jill.
Yeah, I think Chris's idea there is good because we've all put that council meeting in our diary because, for instance, on the June the 10th one, we have a very important meeting at the district, you know, coming to the end of doing the local plan. So I have a problem of a clash, although I can probably get to a bit of it. But it's just, you know, just having, or we'll have that date, just a Monday, you know, random, it may clash with other meetings. Whereas
without even looking to my right for clarification, I'm sure that James has a feel of what we're talking about there. Going back to the time of these meetings and how they clash with Chief Exec leadership meetings on a Wednesday. How about we alter our time from 10 till 12? That would still give us plenty of time if we want to have long discussions, and maybe, and we stress obviously to the leadership the importance of them attending here when required, and maybe they could put their meeting back 1 hour, you know, sort of meet us halfway on a sort of compromise. People think about that? If we stress the importance, you know, hopefully they'll meet us halfway.
I think I'd slightly caution the committee to think about what the aim it was seeking to achieve rather than, and then the best way of doing that. Clearly, if No, I'll put that a different way. It would be. I would suggest it would be a there would be a difference between a committee meeting with a specific agenda item where the chief executive's involvement was specifically sought, and a committee meeting where the chief executive's attendance was welcome, but there wasn't anything you particularly wanted to engage with her on. In the latter scenario, given all of the competing demands on the chief executive's time, even if you move your meetings to assist in avoiding a clash with the leaders and chief executives' meetings, there's still going to be other things that she may need to prioritise beyond observing a scrutiny committee on occasion.
Take that point. I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that we underline the importance of them attending when they can and when we want them, and actually by changing our meetings so they're always changed, it might make it easier than having to do it ad hoc as and when we require them. It was just a thought. Wendy.
I mean, if it works, then fine. But on a personal level, I wouldn't particularly choose 12 o'clock. It's neither here nor there, really.
Agreed.
Okay.
Bounced me twice. I feel like Barnes-Wallis, the bouncing ball. I think going back to Victoria's point about the presence of the chief exec and the leader of the council at scrutiny, I still, my personal opinion is, and it's a feeling I get, that it isn't given the priority it should be given. Maybe that may well be historic. And the evidence of that is just when you look at the attendance figures for the two main people that we have. And even down to another meeting coming in its place. It didn't take priority, and of course there are lots of important things to do. So I think we need to try to accommodate a time which will allow, that even if we don't need them, I don't think the government, the body you're talking about said that it was their specific attendance. It's the fact they should be here full stop, was it?
Well, yeah, that's what they would recommend.
Yeah, that was our recommendation.
That's what they would recommend, but we're not saying that.
No. But with regard to that, so I would suggest that somehow we've got to influence and change behaviours. and culture. And that's a slow process, and you'll do that, sir, in a very diplomatic way, but I think we need to create the environment where that is easy for them to do.
Diplomatically, let me suggest that we're going around the houses a little bit now. Let's make it one of our comments from this meeting, make it clear that it's important for them to attend when they can, and certainly when we want them, and let's see how that works in practice. Victoria.
So just on that, would that be that I agree, I don't think altering meeting times ad hoc is helpful. I always throw this one out there. Why do we always start our meetings so late?
Because people have to come in from different parts. So do I. Well, yeah, I'm in here at 8 o'clock when we have these meetings, but I mean, do people want to meet earlier? I suspect not.
It can take me, and I know Jill as well, it can take me anything from half an hour, which it never does the time we meet, from to an hour. Normally it's about an hour at this time in the morning, but sometimes it can be an hour and a half. And this morning it's half term, so you think brilliant. It was brilliant until I hit standstill traffic, and you probably did the same.
As I say, danger of going round and round.
Yeah,
but
it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. I want to. Oh, James has a comment on that. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a finger going up. I want to go back to, if you'll excuse me, to what we were talking about, i.e. the agenda item today, and just clarify if there are any further points we want to make about the funding for local government reform. I think we've already said that we're going to welcome more detail in the breakdown prior to the June the 10th meeting. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I think there are a number of things arising out of the discussions that we might want to be recommending that people should satisfy themselves over, shall we say. I'll rattle through them. First one is the £43 million figure going to be the maximum, and how do people ensure that they are happy that it will be? Next one, will all 8 councils be able to find their share of whatever it is they're going to need to contribute? Because nearly every day it appears that a district or a borough is announcing some grand new scheme to enable them to spend all their reserves before the unitaries are set up. We should be that those that need to should satisfy themselves very clearly as to what the rules are around the spending of the business rates pilot money, and that we should assure ourselves that the council and other councils are spending that money only in accordance with those rules. We don't want to fall into that trap again. There's a question around, will the transformation activities that are going to be financed out of the programme deliver the required savings, whatever those required savings may be? And finally, the question around, what is the cost of setting up the Children's Trust and who is paying for that? Because I don't think we heard today that it's going to be delivered either from the 43 million or from any transformation savings. And I heard something from Matt about we're going to ask the government for more money. So there's a number of things there that I think we can say that those that need to should satisfy themselves over.
Thank you, Chris. And certainly just on the Children's Trust alone, I'm not confident that 43 million will be the total figure, but there's lots of other things that feed into that as well. Comments, please. Richard.
Methodology.
You just bumped someone.
Did I bump you? Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. I think that how did they get to this 43 million? What was the process they went through? I think it'd be nice to understand, even just a paragraph to say, because was it a finger in the air, or was there some sort of... Yeah, so just how did they get to the 43 million? I'd like to know.
Sorry, can we use the mics because I can't hear what's being said, but absolutely, and again, these are things we're asking more information on prior to June the 10th, I would suggest. Anybody else?
I think, Chair, that Chris has summed it up quite amicably and well. That's it. Points. No, amicably, because we all agree. and that's what cross-party working is for. So well done, Chris.
Cecile.
Yes, the 43 million was the figure that KPMG gave at the beginning.
Yeah,
I think, through you, Chair, I think what you heard through the earlier discussion was that there were two 43 million figures in effect. There was the initial one, which was based on a 1-year lead into establishment, and now there is a second figure, which is also 43 million, that involves a significant element of transformational activity over a 2-year period. So what, if the committee is agreeing Councillor Auger's last point, you're asking for is more information on the breakdown on how that 43 million figure was arrived at.
And we're happy. Same figure and just made the other numbers fit. Because that's what I suspect.
I think the answer to your methodology question will, of course, explain why that is not the case, I'm sure. Victoria.
Is there any reason we couldn't have the answers to these questions at the briefing on the 10th? I'm a little bit confused because I thought the briefing on the 10th was just about the Children's Trust. And now it's been... so it's all... So these questions could be answered then at the all-member briefing, it would seem to make sense.
I personally think it would be useful, for scrutiny at least, to have these before, if it's possible, because that then may inform any queries, questions we have.
Why wouldn't it be possible?
Sorry?
Why wouldn't it be possible? If we want them, we can have them. I keep saying this, we've got to change our dialogue. Scrutiny, want that information before an all-member briefing so we can do informed scrutiny and informed questions.
So you'll be happy for us to put that as part of our conclusion
Chair.
today?
Sorry, through you, Chair. I think there needs to be... Scrutiny needs to be clear about what it is asking for. So you've heard that there's going to be a briefing session for members on local government reform and the Children's Trust on the 10th of June. Members of this committee has identified a number of areas where it feels where it wants further information to be available to all members. So there was further information on how the £43 million figure was arrived at. I should have looked back before I started this. Further information on the programme, the overall programme plan for local government reform. Yeah, the prospectus, and I think if what scrutiny is saying is that information should not be provided to members at the session on the 10th of June, it would be helpful for it to be provided in advance of the session on the 10th of June, then that's a perfectly appropriate thing to put forward. If what scrutiny is saying is, no, we want this information for scrutiny, irrespective of it being provided for the session on the 10th of June, then you beg a response, but it's going to be provided to all members on or ahead of the 10th of June. Why does scrutiny want it? All members are getting it. Scrutiny could still ask, but it may need to make more of a case, or request or require, but it would need to make more of a case as to why it was seeking something that was being provided anyway.
I think we forget the meeting on the 10th of June. These are questions that scrutiny wants answering, and it would certainly be very useful to have them before or either on the 10th of June, but regardless of that meeting, this is the conclusions of scrutiny's meeting today, and we feel as a committee that we want further information on those. I would have thought. Richard, sorry, Victoria.
Yeah. I think all members would want that information, and if they have it before that meeting, it will stop a lot of repetitive questions at that meeting for officers. It will make the questioning more informed. On that list of what we require, I think we need to know, before we discuss the Children's Trust and get the feedback on that, we want to know the costs involved for that meeting. Otherwise, there's no point in having the update on it. We need to know what the costs are and where they're going to come from for that meeting. If we're going to discuss the Children's Trust, that's an absolute minimum.
Although I guess if they are hoping to rely on a government grant, they may not have that answer, although that then begs a further question, what would happen if... Jonathan.
What?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to find out, actually, does this committee have a pre-meet before the 10th of June? Well, I've got it down as Monday, but I'm not 100% that's right.
Yes, the 5th.
It's Wednesday. Then, Chair, then if I may be so bold to suggest that we have, if this is so wish of the committee here, that we have a vision of said briefing, and then we can then discuss it in closed doors under pinks if need be, and then formulate any questions that we have on the paper to be presented prior, and then those answers can be answered on the day. Is that clear, or I'll try to confuse the subject at all?
I think, Chair, sorry to jump in, the issue that I'm seeking to highlight is that the committee seems to be varying back and forth between this is information that Scrutiny is asking and wants to be provided to Scrutiny's timetable, and this is information that would benefit all councillors and therefore should be provided linked to the session on the 10th of June.
Correct. However, any questions on the scrutiny, although anybody can come here and speak, but the overview and scrutiny will be in our realm as the overview scrutiny committee, so therefore I don't think it'd be unreasonable for us to have vision of that and formulate questions that need to be raised. I'm just suggesting.
And what I was trying to say earlier, I think, is that these are what scrutiny wants, and if that therefore benefits the rest of the council, albeit, but regardless of that, if that 10th of June meeting was not taking place, we would still want these answers.
Yes.
And also, Chair, so if I may finish, also, Chair, that I'm pretty sure that the next meeting that we have here, the topic of discussion is going to be the meeting on the 10th.
Yes, Chair, I think I feel that we're bogging ourselves down over nothing at the moment. We've all agreed about this 43 million. Now, OK, we'll have the answers on the 10th of June, which I feel is the right way of doing it, because not only we get the answers, but everybody else will get the answers. Now, we should follow that through, obviously, as the year goes on. But I can't see, does it make any difference whether we have any information beforehand on that figure, because that's the figure that it seems the experts have come up with. And it indicated earlier on through you, Chair, where you said, we're not accountants, we're not, too many experts on finance to a certain degree. So I would like to see we are moved, this scrutiny committee, through you, Chair, has moved tremendously over these last few months. We are where we are now. We are respected for what we are, which is a very important thing with scrutiny, is to get respect of officers and others. And I think that we have a stage now. On the 10th of June, we have all the information that some information will come to us which the officers want to tell us. On the 16th of June, we meet as a scrutiny committee to analyse, no doubt, what was said on the 10th of June. And I can't see any way away from that, any better situation, because if I get, I know the committee's indicated that you want information beforehand, and I can appreciate that, but this is the first one. So let's get this one right to begin with, and then we can move on the rest of the year how we want to do it. But I think it's important now, we have the information, it's 43 million, 10th of June, other information will be given to us. On the 16th of June, we can all meet round here again, which is only about a fortnight away, you know what I mean? It's not the end of the world, we ain't going to wait to the end of the year for it. And with that, you can all have a nice fortnight's little holiday if you want to, you know what I mean? But that's how I see it, Chair. I think the trouble is with scrutiny, they tend to bog themselves down with information and situations where they don't need to go down that road. Let's be factual, let's be simple.
I'm not entirely sure we're actually talking at cross purposes here. I think this is the same. I mean, I did absolutely make the point about we are not financial experts, but I also made the point that we need to be comfortable ourselves in what we're being told, and that's why I think we're asking these questions. But again, I stress these are questions that scrutiny has a valid reason to ask, and if it benefits those briefings, then so be it.
So, Chair. Scrutiny is asking to be provided with further information on the makeup of the £43 million figure, the prospectus for the overall local government reform programme, and the costs of the Children's Trust and how they would be met. And Scrutiny would like to be provided with this information as soon as possible.
And we also...
Prior to the 10th of June.
Yeah, sorry, Adam, I was going to bring you in, wasn't I? And we also want to, as we've discussed, stress the importance of senior office and politicians being here as and when, and we also wanted to send a message somehow to the joint committees about how we can work in partnership with maybe some sort of working group or whatever. Was there anything else?
Well, Councillor Stambra raised various points about the need for confidence that £43 million is it will be the maximum cost of delivering local government reform, that all 8 local authorities will be able to provide their share of the funding, around the rules around the use of business rates pilot funding, and that spending is done within those rules, and that transformation activity will deliver the savings required of it. If those are recommendations that the committee wishes to relay to the NCC Cabinet, then it is open to it to do so.
Adam, sorry, did you still want to come in? And then I've got Cecile.
Yeah, very briefly, Chairman, more than happy with what James has just summarised, with the caveat that it needs to be with us before that meeting on the 10th. I have to take issue with what Malcolm said. If there's anything that I've learnt in my time as a councillor, it's that if you don't ask for the information you need, then it may well not be forthcoming. You know, this committee has a remit to demand information, to scrutinise it, to get to the facts. You know, we can't be relying on others to simply, give us what they want. You know, I'm sure there's no ulterior agenda going on. However, someone else's interpretation of what we need and what we want may very well not be the same as our view. So it's important that we get out there and we demand what we see as
and I personally believe even just by asking for these informations may get others perhaps to think a little more widely about their future decision making and everything.
Indicating that we don't get the information. All I'm trying to acknowledge to you all is that when we get that information, whether it's on the 10th or before, we're not meeting until the 16th to diagnose that and scrutinise that. So we might as well just wait until the 10th. That's all I'm saying.
I don't think it necessarily, there's any kind of great conflict there. James wants to come in, and then Cecile.
If Scrutiny submits a report to the Cabinet on those last points that I mentioned, which were the ones that Councillor Stambra raised, that will go to the Cabinet meeting on the 11th of June. So if Scrutiny wants a quick response back from the Cabinet to those points, then making them a formal report to the Cabinet meeting will not get that response by the 10th of June.
Okay. Do it another way. just ask.
Right to the Leader of the Council.
Yeah. Cecile.
Yes, Councillor Stambras said 43 million now it's spent. Now, could we see maybe in a different way? It's 43 million because where they are. But if during all the discussion they spend a bit more, but it's beneficial for the whole of the 2 Unit 3 because they are transforming. What is important is that the transformation is done well. And when the 2 Unit 3 are set up, they are set up in the best way possible. So I think the 43 million is what we ask and so on, but I would like to see a bit of flexibility if we spend a bit more to deliver better after, or spend less because we also can deliver cheaper. So I would not be too...
I don't think, it isn't a decision of this committee how much money this council or any other council eventually spends, but clearly we want to understand the current thinking, and that thinking may well change during the next year or two. Victoria, then Chris.
Okay, final point on this, but have we heard ourselves? We had a meeting to discuss the 43 million and we haven't got a list of the breakdown. And we're saying that nowhere in this council that breakdown exists, and why the hell didn't it come to this meeting? Why haven't we got it here and now? It's absolutely bonkers. We're discussing, they've got to 43 million with a process. There must be a paper, there must be a breakdown. We want that breakdown and we're just spending an hour discussing it. Where is it? Why hadn't we got it here in the first place?
I certainly haven't got...
We've got this. We've got to have a sense of urgency here. You know, we've learned this from children's services, which, you know, we're saying the same things again and again that we were saying 12 months ago. We've got to get a sense of urgency about everything we do.
And I certainly don't have the understanding now that I hoped earlier this morning that I would have by this time. Chris.
Yeah, I agree with what Victoria said, and I'm sorry, but I challenge what Cecile said. We've got this figure of 43 million. It's our duty to ensure that the financial side of scrutiny follows that. Once we start saying, oh, we can go a bit more, we can go a bit more, you're opening a can of worms there. So I really don't feel like we want to say we don't mind a bit of flexibility. I think we need to say...
Again, I don't think it's this committee's job to say how much the eventual figure is, but we absolutely need to understand the thinking behind that 43 million or whatever it may rise to. But, sorry, James.
So I think there seem to be 3 areas in which the committee is reaching conclusions. So there are the requests for further information, the make-up of the 43 million, the overall LGA programme prospectus, and the costs of the Children's Trust and how they to be met. Requested by Scrutiny to be provided prior to the 10th of June. Bingo. Second area, the point around the importance of there being overview and scrutiny of progress with the delivery of local government reform, which, because of the nature of the subject, needs to be done jointly. That's a resolution that the committee can relay to the appropriate bodies, potentially that is the 2 joint committees, although that will need subject to confirmation. Not something that's within the power of the committee to do. It's not in this committee's power unilaterally to establish joint county-wide scrutiny. It is within this committee's scope to raise the need for that to the appropriate bodies. Third area, the points raised by Councillor Stamber initially that I summarised around the need for confidence, that £43 million will be the maximum. All 8 councils will be able to provide their share. Rules around the business rates pilot are clear and followed, and that transformation activity will deliver the required saving. The committee seemed to be clear on those, that it wanted to highlight those points. There was a remaining question that you need to resolve around how it does that, whether it does that more quickly by, for example, writing to the leader of the council to set those out, or more formally by making those the subject of a report to the Cabinet, which will go to the next Cabinet meeting on the 11th of June. If members are agreed on those are areas it wishes to highlight, the remaining question is about how.
Okay. Are we all agreed with those? I would suggest the answer to that last question is right to the leader of the council. Chris.
There was one further one, which was some clarity on the cost of setting up the Children's Trust and where the money's coming from.
But that was being picked up as an information request, which is why I left it out.
Okay, we done? Yeah. Great, thank you. We're getting there. Right, move on then to agenda item 7, which is the work programme and responses to previous resolutions, which you should all have in your pack. Anybody want to start me off? I guess if we look at... Sorry?
I'm happy to start.
Oh, right. James will make an
straight to the members,
overview.
although having jumped in, I want to start by saying it's obviously the standard report setting out the current and potential future work programme and responses to previous resolutions. Section 4 deals with the work programme, which, perhaps appropriately given that we're at the very start of the new council year, is not completely populated, but does identify a number of potential future topics for scrutiny at paragraph 4.2, page 25, transformation programme progress being included there. To pick up a couple of points on page 25 and 26, so as you already mentioned, off-agenda information on the NCC's approach to assets was circulated to members yesterday. Page 26, comments on the vast majority of quality accounts, with one have been returned already. That's Northampton General, Kettering General, Northamptonshire Healthcare and East Midlands Ambulance Service. There was one that was received after the others from St Andrews Healthcare, which has been circulated to working group members by email. And then we are in the process of looking to convene a meeting of the LGSS Joint Overview and Scrutiny Working Group mid-July. Appendix 1 sets out responses to previous resolutions. Again, you've highlighted that already in the meeting. That reports on the work that the committee did at recent meetings on early years funding and on Children's First Northamptonshire went to the last cabinet meeting, and responses are still awaited. Otherwise, Chairman, happy to take any questions, but it's over to the committee to set out its priorities.
Okay, we've already said that our pre-meeting, our agenda-setting meeting will be on the 5th, didn't we? So I guess that's where we will sort of set up the next full meeting. The two working groups currently set up. Well, the health one is basically finished, and I just suggest that the members of that working group reply by email to whatever James has sent out. We have got a list of things that we've had responses or a promise of further action, which I guess we should go through. Jill, sorry, you wanted to come in first then?
Thank you. I was going to pick up on 5.2 about the LGSS joint overview and scrutiny, and James has just mentioned that a meeting is going to be convened in July. I'm rather concerned that we're constrained by the fact that you can only have one task because this other one exists, but that other one is completely separate from us. I believe that although I'm not on it, I believe it was on the list we had at the AGM of who was on it. So I can't see really why that constrains us to start with. But secondly, that is so important. I'm rather disappointed that it is met so infrequently. And I think that is quite an urgent thing. The other thing I was going to pick up on the other topics was that I'm also very concerned about the timeliness of these responses. So we have a meeting and we send questions to Cabinet. Then questions are made at Cabinet. Quite often, those responses are not available straight away, which is fair enough. But we then don't seem to get the replies, and so we then have another meeting here where we still haven't got the replies, so we can't discuss them, and I think we're sort of slipping behind. For instance, on the early years, we made a report, we haven't had a reply. We said about the lack of urgency on the retention and recruitment. We still haven't had replies. It just seems to be a lack of urgency on those, and I'm concerned that we're slipping on those items. And one that I was also picked up on was about the Children's Trust. When the section came out, the reply from the Secretary of State, he commented about whether education would be included, but didn't actually make a recommendation on that. It seems from what Anna said today that that's decided that education will not go into it. But I'm just wondering at what point and who is making that decision. Is it the Commissioner or is it the DCS or whatever? I'm not quite sure what the process is for that. Perhaps we'll get some clarification at our briefing.
Thank you. Before I throw that open to further discussion, James, I think, wants to come in about the recruitment and detention of social work a bit. I, however, would like to say, I mean, you'll remember I circulated the questions from the finance report that we sent to last Cabinet, which we have not had a reply to. Given the effort that some people took when we met to discuss this, I mean, that meeting went on for over 2 hours. I mean, okay, it took me probably as long again to type up the responses that we had. I'm disappointed that we don't have a response to those for this meeting, simply because before we know it, we'll be catching up with ourselves and we'll be talking about the next month's finance meeting. And, you know, before we know it, we'll be getting all the answers 6 months from now, when they'll be irrelevant. James, though, you want to talk about retention recruitment?
Yes, and the LGSS working group. So when a report is from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is presented to the Cabinet, it would be unfair to say you get no response because you get some sort of some verbal response from the Cabinet member at the meeting, and then some response from the Cabinet as a whole in terms of whether they agree some, all or none of the recommendations being made by Scrutiny. What we haven't had as yet on these is the follow-up written response from the Cabinet member in each case. So you've had something, you haven't had everything. It's not a case of you've had nothing. On the LGSS working group, 2 points. Firstly, this committee is not obligated to participate in joint scrutiny of LGSS. It should be a decision that the committee takes in the context of all its other priorities, the other things that it might use its total available resource for, and as Councillor Mercer has highlighted, that's even more marked for this committee than it would have been in the past, given the tighter focus, the greater onus on using finite resources to best effect. The second point about the LGSS working group is that there is a certain degree of complication involved in organising it, given that you're effectively setting up a meeting involving 4 parties, representatives from 3 local authorities and LGSS management, rather than just 1 or 2 parties, as would be the case for an NCC-only working group. That undoubtedly has an effect on the organisation of it, as also in the past year has been the degree of fluidity involved relating to LGSS at different times.
Thank you, James. And we've had discussions before about how the fact we're only allowed 2 working groups may hinder us. Hasn't happened yet where that's caused a problem, but we have come close once or twice. And it may be that we do need to suspend our working group on LGSS if that were to happen. Sorry, you wanted to come back, and then I've got Victoria waiting.
Come back on that. I mean, this LGSS just seems to be a complete red herring as far as whether we can have 2 working groups. I mean, we may not need 2 working groups, and we haven't. But I just feel, since it's a completely separate body with separate membership that meets separately, as James said, with several different authorities, which we have no input into, and, you know, probably shouldn't. I can't see how it has any effect on our working parties.
James, just to answer that specific point, then I've got Victoria.
The LGSS Scrutiny Working Group is not a completely separate body. The parent committee for it at NCC is this committee, and if this committee decided that it didn't want to participate in it, then it could withdraw. And in that respect, it is exactly the same as any other working group that this committee may choose to set up. We have 2 slots. Do we use one of them for topic X or one of them for topic Y? It's just if topic Y is scrutiny of LGSS, it happens to be done jointly rather than NCC only.
And I've got no problem as getting out of that if and when we need to.
By then, James, that LGSS Scrutiny Working Party, since it's one of ours, as you say, then reports back to us, and all the members on that are on this committee, are they?
Yes.
Right, okay.
But we've not met since the formation of this committee, which is one of the issues.
Yeah.
Victoria.
Right, so James, you're absolutely right. We've had a response. We haven't had a sufficient response. 12 months. Does anyone know the significance of 12 months? Well, 12 months ago is when the working group on social worker retention met and did its work. 12 months ago. We need to ask ourselves what's happened since then, because, you know, we're meant to own that. We're meant to own that work and own the action from that work, and it has been 12 months. And I think we need to look at ourselves and say, what could we have done more to move that forward? Because at the moment, we don't know, we don't have any evidence that that work has been effective. And I think we need to take that very seriously and have a look at ourselves as to why that hasn't been effective, because there was a lot of good work done. And as a group, we need to not resolve, not make recommendations, go, we did this work, what has happened, have we been effective? If we haven't, what can we do differently to make sure that we are going forward?
I think we asked for, I don't know when they started looking at that, but we asked for and received a 6-month review on the publication of Scrutiny's report on recruitment and retention, which we discussed at the last meeting. The report we sent to Cabinet a couple of weeks ago, I think, absolutely. You know, I think the wording in there underlined the fact that we were disappointed, and yeah, we do need a formal response to that. It's not just enough to get a nodding response at Cabinet almost. Adam.
Thank you, Chairman. Just drawing again on my experience at Daventry, there we have a tracking system of all of the actions agreed and requested by Scrutiny, and we use a RAG system to track whether those have been implemented to the committee's satisfaction. Ideally like to see something like that implemented here so that we can, you know, give a red light or an amber light to the response that we're getting from stuff like the social worker retention work, because it's so important that this committee has that constant ability to refer back to its previous work to ensure that it is being implemented. So.
Appendix 1 sort of does that, but without the RAG system, of course. But clearly, on this particular issue, it is listed there that we're still awaiting a response. Is there any way we can hurry that response up? Well, possibly not, other than say we're still waiting, I guess. But it is disappointing. I'm really disappointed. I'm sure Jonathan, more than most of us, is disappointed. Jill.
Chairman, at our last meeting, which is in the minutes we just agreed, you did say, well, we'll go through the normal formal channels, we'll say we're disappointed and we'll send it in the minutes and this is our response. But if that fails to produce a reply, then you will approach perhaps individually to the Cabinet or to the leader to say, you know, ask when we will have, when those actions will be taking place.
I think that was on a specific issue, which I don't remember, but the point's still there, certainly. Okay, so are we talking now specifically about the response to the report we sent to Cabinet about children's improvements, and what action would you like to take? I'm getting a feeling that there is some unease that we haven't yet had a response. I mean, albeit it was only a couple of weeks ago, to be fair.
I think, Chair, on the children's thing is that we with the report that we presented, we agreed to delay further, shall we say, demanding answers to whatever's been happening, and has anything started, because things were going places, and they said they'll give us a bit more time. Well, we're now in June nearly, and we still haven't received the information when they said they wanted to delay it coming back. So I think then that gives a good reason enough to bring it back. And then to say, look, we want some answers now. You've had enough chance. We're not getting them. anything within children's, we're not really getting the answers that we asked to questions that we asked previously.
Suggestion, Chair. Could I suggest that you as Chair raise this with the leader and the Cabinet member in the first instance? If that's done very promptly, then there's no reason why there shouldn't be a response to that in time for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee pre-meeting next week. If by that point the situation is not to the committee's satisfaction, then there is scope for it to take further action as appropriate.
Happy to do that if the committee agreed, and I will also, if you don't mind, add on the comments about the finance questions we had, and would also ask for those to be prepared before we meet at the next meeting. Agreed? Okay. Anything else on, I mean, if we look at appendix item 1, I mean, that was obviously one issue. There are lots of things in here where we've been provided with details, and lots of things where we haven't yet. I mean, we've been talking about children's improvements, haven't we? And in particular, the bit about recruitment and retention. There's also the early years report that went to the last cabinet as well, which we haven't yet had a response to.
I did check before I came in with the Forum of Early Years Providers that our payments appear to have been on time this month. So that's just a bit of good news. That our payments to early years providers this month appear to be on time and the appropriate amounts. Don't want to speak too soon, but you know, we've got to give credit where credit's due, that work was done, and unless you're going to correct me.
Adam?
It's not a correction, but further to that, do we know where we are with the historical payment situation? Because I know from a constituent of mine that until very recently, and we're talking earlier this month, there were still significant sums of money outstanding.
And as chair, I recently received a huge document of about, I guess, 300-400 pages from a provider who appears to have a 120,000 outstanding, and they've sent me all the documents relating to everything that's been going on the last couple of years as evidence. I've asked for a response to that. I don't know if I've yet had that.
I think my constituency was only about 24,000.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if it was the same, but clearly not.
I think the feedback on that is that they are being picked off one by one and dealt with, and anecdotally, I monitor the Facebook page, which has 550 of the providers on, and ask the question on there, and at the moment there's no negative feedback this month. So there might still be individual cases, but I do think as a piece of work, the dig down into that area and the response has actually been successful.
Okay. And presumably that current position will be part of the feedback we do eventually get, and that takes just, you know, what I was saying earlier, though, sometimes just by asking the questions, sometimes just by shaking the can almost, I think